Excellent. Thank you so much, my wonderful panelists. So I'm going to just give a little overview, and then we're going to start. So you know that our kind of title was "What on Earth Just Hit Climate Tech?" I'm going to let my panelists contradict me. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think that the short answer is that money hit climate tech, right? We had a dip in funding in 2024. Funding for climate tech fell to $754 million, and now this year it surged back to $1.1 billion. So these are numbers coming from Tech Cabal. And so to put that into perspective, African startups raised $1.4 billion in the first half of last year, and climate and energy attracting over $200 million, and making it the most funded sector, but most of the capital flowed to energy and mobility. So it's interesting here that we're going to talk about sectors that don't get as much attention, but are critically vital. So, and since also, so excellent. So I'll begin by asking each participant to briefly introduce their work, and then we'll just have like an organic conversation. So, question for Yasha first. You have developed a way to monetize biodiversity. How?
Good question. Okay, so my name is Yasha Portnoy. I'm a CTO co-founder of EarthAcre, and we're a company that creates a way for communities to get direct benefits from nature. There are about $200 billion in nature finance in 2024. Yet individuals on the ground, and I'm assuming somewhat similar to our esteemed agri-tech panel before us, see very little of that money, while the rest of us reap the benefits from clean ecosystems, from air, from water, from other ecosystem services. So we at EarthAcre build products in order to make that gap between the finance and the individual on the ground disappear for those folks who are doing the last mile nature stewardship where most of the remaining biodiversity in the world lives. And just out of curiosity, just a quick show of hands, who has heard of the word biodiversity before? Okay, great, fantastic. All right, I'll know how to answer future questions. Thanks.
Could you, just a quick follow-up question, who's putting money into this?
Yeah, so out of that 200 billion, which is a very large number, we're looking at ecotourism, we're looking at philanthropic organizations, we're looking at carbon, climate, agroforestry, and on and on and on and on, right? So the money is there. But what we're seeing is that the investors, the funders, do not see the money reaching the individual down on the ground, and vice versa, not seeing the outputs of where the money goes. Therefore, the trust in that whole system, ecosystem, is somewhat broken, and we're working to fix it.
Thank you, Yasha. Interesting enough, we've been talking in the entire day about AI and digital payments, but without biodiversity, none of that will matter. So the next question is for Pieter, for the head of tech for Newform Foods. And sort of, I bake in what Pieter does in the question, right? Why should we eat the food that your company helps produce? And what impact does your technology have on the planet?
So there's a lot to unpack here. I'm Pieter Labuschagne from Newform Foods. We're a biotech startup that's based in Cape Town and also expanding in the UK. And our main focus is on cellular agriculture. And we've got two verticals, mammalian cell culture and plant cell culture. In the mammalian cell culture space, we've been working on something called cultivated meat. For those of you that don't know what cultivated meat is, it's essentially meat grown without the animal. So we grow meat in a lab at this point, so we're doing R&D, and we're getting to a point where we want to scale up into pilot systems, which would look like a small brewery, just to picture in your mind. And from a plant tissue culture point of view, what we're also working on is nutraceuticals from a botanical side, and these are quite high value and also filter into the food space due to their nutritional value. What we're busy trying to solve essentially is a few different things. Number one, from an ethical point of view, 99% of meat that's produced currently is produced using large-scale agriculture and factory farming, which has a lot of ethical issues, as I'm sure most people would be aware.
As well as carbon emissions.
Exactly, and the second part is the sustainability and environmental aspect to it. If you look at carbon emissions, our process essentially reduces the amount of carbon emissions by about 92%. So massive reduction there, massive reduction in land usage, massive reduction in water usage. So from a sustainability perspective, there's a massive impact. And also from a health perspective, there's a huge impact of our technology based on the fact that there's large-scale antibiotic resistance that's being introduced by general agriculture of meat. And also, I think one of the key things that we can solve is food scarcity and supply chain issues, as we can basically operate locally and produce locally instead of having to import or essentially scale out farming.
So I had heard of lab meat, but not plant cell, cultures. So that was a new one for me. And of course, I know that you all are thinking the exact same thing. So I'll ask the question: have you eaten your food, and is it yummy?
Yes, I have. I've eaten both of our prototypes, which is lamb and beef. The lamb especially was amazing, and of course, I'm not actually paid to say this, but it was one of the best lamb meatballs that I've ever had. So yes.
Has anybody in the audience had any lamb-grown meat or plants? So I've had. Okay, excellent. Yeah. Okay, excellent. What countries are you now operating in, if you're selling?
Yeah, so we have a large lab facility in Cape Town, and we also are building out a smaller lab facility in the UK, mainly focused on plant tissue culture.
Okay, excellent, excellent. This is an interactive session, so if you have any questions as we go along, just stand up and I will get you a mic, okay? So that I want us to stay alive, because I think this is a really exciting session. Thank you for that. We will return more on the yummy food. This question now is for Luvo from Green Arch Innovations. Okay? Agriculture, as we mentioned, is the largest industrial sector on the continent. The good news is that local climate tech innovations are outperforming imported technologies. By the way, I'm relying on Luvo's, kind of pre-note to me to formulate this question because I thought it was so well articulated. So anyway, so we're relying, so tech innovations on the continent are outperforming imported technologies, which speaks to African innovation that is creating solutions for African problems. But my question is, are we receiving enough capital to truly transform the sector, or are we still stuck in pilots instead of systems?
All right. Good afternoon again, everyone. My name is Luvo Gugwana, the founder of Green Arch Innovations. It's a very important question. I think one of the most important things is, I feel like you're correct to say the local SMMEs, they are developing innovative solutions that really outperform imported solutions. And the reason behind that is that we actually innovate for our own local context. So that allows us to develop solutions that speak into agricultural challenges, that speaks to the local context. I think that's the reason we've seen enormous growth in terms of local African SMMEs developing tech solutions. But however, the question around, are we really getting tailor-made funding solutions? The answer is a bit of both, right? I'm saying that is, I think for the African context, we really need soft capital. So we need a lot of philanthropy work that needs to come in and play just for the first losses. And then later on, we can invite VCs to come in and then develop our SMMEs. I think there's something that I wanted to say, that at this moment, I feel like we are really stuck in the pilot purgatory. I'm saying that there's enough capital for grants to support ventures to build and pilot, but there's not really enough capital that is directed towards scaling. So to a point that we're stuck in that piloting purgatory where we have SMMEs that have mastered the pitching and the piloting, but really haven't really seen any growth in terms of them scaling and commercializing.
Thank you for that. We're going to dive more into the financial aspect of this, the investments, the structuring of some of these deals. But I also wanted to do a follow-up question. Can you tell us, like, give us a practical example of an innovation that you're excited about?
All right. So we're working with quite a number of innovations in our company. One of the innovations that we're working on, we're actually developing climate-controlled agricultural system, which is a modular greenhouse that is empowered by IoT. So what that modular greenhouse does is it allows farmers to be able to do a yield prediction, so they know exactly what they're growing within that greenhouse. And it actually helps them as well to have a bankable business. A lot of our farmers, they know the practice of farming, but rather in terms of the farm management and the financial presentation of the businesses, that's where many struggles are. So we've developed a system where we build the infrastructure and plug it to the farm management system. So the farm management system allows you to know exactly what you're growing, what's the projected yield output, and what's the financial gain from that business. And what it does is we've created a model that is easy to replicate throughout Africa. We currently have footprint in South Africa and in Botswana, and we're really expecting now to grow into East Africa as well. So in that way, we're creating a model that can be replicated in the space of agriculture and try to attract investment in agriculture, because the reason we don't really see much investment in the space is because it's not really predictable. But if you build in systems that allow predictability and allow investors to see the potential in these ventures, then in that way we'll be able to answer that question.
Excellent, excellent. And just a last question, if you feel comfortable telling us, how many end clients do you have at the moment?
So we work, currently in our system, we work with over 300 farmers.
Over 300?
Over 300 farmers that are using the farm management dashboard. And we've actually split now in terms of building the solution. We work with huge corporates, likes of Engine. We've seen them coming in place because they support a lot of SMMEs in terms of fuel and diesel space. And if we work with such big corporates, it allows us to create a footprint through their channels.
Got it. Thank you for that. So let's turn to the money. I don't know if you caught, how many people on here are well-versed in finance and structures? Probably lots, but just in case, hands up. So, because I know that I had to Google something like junior debt, and I had to look at first loss. We're going to turn to Lucretia Chopera, who's going to explain to us overall what's happening with funding on the continent for climate tech, and then go into some of the specifics of what kind of deals work on the continent, right? So first question is, overall, is the continent receiving enough funding for climate tech, Lucretia?
Oh, very good questions. So my name is Lucretia Chopera. I'm Africa Deal Flow Manager for Katapult Ocean. Katapult Ocean is a global impact fund that's headquartered in Oslo, but our mandate is global. We do have now offices in Cape Town, and we are raising another Asia-focused fund. Our portfolio has a total of 91 opportunities, but of that, only 4 are on the continent for a number of reasons. One of them is that it's a global fund, so you have our African founders focused on blue economy, which is in itself in its infancy and quite early, that are, in a sense, competing with someone who is a Silicon Valley founder, to some respect, or someone who's sitting in Australia with better access to larger ticket size grants. You mentioned that. They have a more developed VC ecosystem. And if they're in LATAM region, they also might have a very different market size, for scalability. So the reason why Katapult now has an Africa-focused team is to try and carve out space for blue economy founders that are coming up with solutions that are for Africans that speak to, the gaps that we're finding in blue economy on the continent. And our mandate touches on, a broad spectrum of innovations from shipping industry, I'll give some of the reasons why we have conviction around shipping, around...
Pause. Does everyone know what the blue economy is? Raise of hands. Okay.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Just explain.
Okay, so Blue Economy focuses on innovations that are, well, to give basic examples, we touch on fisheries, we have a mandate around, decarbonization of the shipping industry. 80% of our global goods are actually transported over oceans. So our mandate and our fund focuses on backing founders that are focused on ocean impact opportunities. And our mandate also extends to plastic waste, which winds up in the oceans most of the time. So we support that. We also have in East Africa, in particular Tanzania, where there's seaweed farmers, we have a lot of solutions that are seaweed-based that we are supporting and trying to grow on the continent. So that's some of the things that we look at.
Thank you for that. So blue, everything with water. That was pretty straightforward. I love that, and I wanted to give you a chance to talk about the shipping specifically. I cut you off there, so please continue there, and then I will follow up with a second question, which is, what, in terms of financing, why is it so hard for these industries, these sectors, these subsectors to get money, and what's working?
So like you started out, you pointed out that climate in terms of where we were at the end of 2024 and 2025, we are now trending upwards in terms of total funding, which was about a 30% increase over a year. Also, in addition to that, climate received, I think, more than 30% of total funding to the continent. So 1.1 billion out of about just about 3 billion total funding. So, we're now in a space, I think, where climate is not looked at as startup land or very early stage. We're starting to see maturity in terms of more even VC funds, more venture studios that are active, more climate-based accelerator programs. But there's still a lot of gaps around transitioning from grant dependence to commercialization. So that's most of the work that we're doing, especially for Blue, which is even more earlier than general climate. So at the moment, Blue Economy is treated as almost a sub-vertical of overall climate. And we are working to change that because 70% of our globe is oceans. And there is a lot of untapped opportunities there. It's got a huge impact on climate outcomes across the globe. And if we look at Africa in particular, in terms of job creation, fisheries, support more than 350 million estimated in terms of families that are dependent on fisheries. So there is a lot of data points that we now have around the impact of ocean on general climate, hence the need to increase deal flow there as well for us. And then to your question around, are we receiving enough? On the continent, I would say, we are seeing positive results, but globally, climate still receives less than 5% of total funding in VC. So just understanding that there's a social component and an impact component to climate funding, obviously, so that's not enough. That's barely scratching the surface. So it's a yes and no.
Got it. Thank you for that. Any questions so far? Okay, all right. So I'll plow ahead and, oh, excellent, yes. I will run.
Thank you so much. I'm Martin Kanku. I'm coming from the Democratic Republic of Congo. I'm happy to see you because we are in the same program from the UKTP. So my question is about, well, why don't we see real impact of all these tech solution in the climate and food tech startups? We can see like in fintech, we have solutions like Fincra that are coming from Africa. We see them, they're growing, they're exporting to other regions, but mainly solutions coming in agriculture, food, and other things, they are staying in the same regions that they have being built. We don't see them exporting to other regions, to other countries. Why is that? But because you are talking about they have receiving enough funds, like you were talking about $2 billion, $1 billion, that's too much money. Why don't we see real impact of these funds on African market?
Thank you. Thank you for that question. You want to go first? Or? Go first.
Yeah, I can try. Thanks. That's a good question. I think there are a number of reasons. I think where climate is in terms of maturity of the climate ecosystem is where fintech was, without disclosing my age, 7 to 10 years ago. So it takes time for an ecosystem to develop. And also, if you look at where the concentration of deals are in climate, it's in sectors that are easier to commercialize. So energy sector, for example, is getting, and mobility in terms of electrical vehicles. And also, if you look at like solar panels, because the revenues are easy, they're easy pathways to, recurring revenues. We're seeing a lot of, so that's where a lot of the 1.1 billion went. But if we look at where the impact and the numbers are, it's still in very early opportunities. So we have farm management systems, for example, that he's talking about, but he's servicing 300 farmers that might not necessarily have capacity to be on a subscription model. I'm not sure if you're seeing those challenges. That's what we see in fisheries as well. We've got a lot of fishery aggregators that are, supporting hundreds of small fisheries, but most of it needs to be grant funded. And by the way, this is not unique to Africa. It's also subsidized globally. It's just that African budgets are more limited than maybe the US. So there is part of that. I don't know if someone else wants to add something.
Luvo?
Yes, I think I wanted to respond to the question, especially around why don't we see innovation expanding throughout Africa? Why do they stay localized? I think agriculture is a very interesting industry because it has a lot of cultural nuances. The way we farm in South Africa might be different the way people farm in Kenya, but they're farming the same commodities. And now you realize that when someone develops a solution that is applicable throughout the agricultural sector, because of the cultural nuances, the application of it becomes very difficult, especially at the adoption phase. For example, we're building smart sensors that are empowered by IoT for aquaculture sector. The intention is to allow aquaculture farmers to be able to understand their water quality parameters, and also want to install AI cameras just for biomass for them to predict how much fish do they have in their ponds. But when you deploy the system in South Africa and same industry, you realize that adoption is different because of how people believe growing fish is being practiced. In a way that, for example, to get them into subscription models, it's difficult because they don't really believe in subscribing in a model that they don't yet see the results of. But rather now is how do we pivot, deploy the same technology, but let's find a way to apply how people want this technology to assist them, and how are they open up to spend money in terms of procuring those systems. So a lot of it is, one, it's cultural, And a lot of it as well, it's policies. You'd find that it's difficult to do business in other countries, especially around business formulation. Like, I mean, we went to Zambia, and in South Africa, to formulate a business, it can take me less than a week, even 2 days to just formulate a company. When we went to Zambia, it's a different case. So for us to register a company, it might take, even for locals, not really for foreign nationals, but for local people. So those are the things that are impeding the growth in terms of how we are upscaling our solutions throughout the continent.
Do you want to add something briefly?
And just to add to what he was saying, you have to also ask, how does fintech scale? There is an infrastructure in terms of telecoms that supports most fintech innovations. That's already there. So that's part of the reason why mobile money, for example, could scale very quickly across the continent. Now, if you look at a founder that's solving for coastal communities, for example, first of all, they don't even have access to data, right? That's the first thing. So they don't have that. And then they don't have access to reliable power, electricity. They don't have access to a road network. So most of what the founders in climate are solving for are value chain issues. It's not just creating an aggregation platform. It's actually an end-to-end value chain where he goes, okay, how do I limit, like they mentioned in the earlier panel, post-harvest losses for the fisheries? And then how do I get this fisherman to actually have access to credit? Because he doesn't even have that, right? And then how do I get solar panels for refrigeration to make sure that, we again limit post-harvest losses? And then how do I get refrigerated trucks for him to get to Nairobi from the coastal communities where they're operating? You see, so it's a value chain play just locally. So imagine now trying to expand to a neighboring country. So they need asset-backed finance, not just equity like your traditional VC. So they need blended capital for it to happen. And it's starting to happen, but it takes very different pathways in terms of how they're going to scale across borders.
Thank you for that. We'll ask questions throughout. So I'm going to throw out a question to Yasha first, but it's for the entire panel, and I would like to hear from the audience as well. Now, I have a perception that the returns in some of the sectors that we're talking about here are lower. I may be wrong, so I would love to hear about that. But because I'm trying to find the reason for why these sectors are not getting the capital they need. So my question is, what can be done to draw more investment into food, biodiversity, and agriculture? Yasha.
What a great question. Biodiversity is very interesting, and for the sake of talking about biodiversity, I'll mostly talk about nature and valuing nature. Is one line good? Is 10? Is an acacia forest good or bad? What about what lives underground? What about microorganisms? These are the type of questions that we probably could not have answered 10, 15 years ago. But with the onset of AI, onset of other technologies, and we can list them out, things like eDNA, things like AI classification of animals, things like bioacoustics, and list goes on and on. There's incredible work being done here. In addition to global drive to figure out how we value nature, how we put it into policy, I actually am seeing a really positive drive in that direction. We're starting to see, just like carbon markets, we're starting to see biodiversity markets start being created. We're starting to see companies who previously only had climate initiatives and climate goals start putting money towards their biodiversity and nature goals. We're starting to see people understand the difference between an offset and an investment in a healthy ecosystem, and why it's so important for all of us. So I guess I'm both agreeing and disagreeing. I think the money is starting to go there. It is a very nascent market. There are biodiversity credit markets that are starting to happen. We're part of them. Yeah, I think the future is really exciting. I'm just excited to be in it.
Okay, so basically, since it's a nascent market, you're actually saying that there's a large upside actually for returns there. All right? Anybody interested? Any takers? Should be. Anyone else on the panel wants to address that?
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, I think I can speak for the novel foods and sort of food tech space that we play in. I think it's a long road that we have to walk from a cellular agriculture perspective, because we essentially have very long R&D timelines that's relatively capex intensive. So what's happened in the past 10 years since cellular agriculture really got onto the map was that a lot of large players overpromised in terms of what they could deliver in the time frame in which they could, and that made it very difficult for smaller players to be able to generate funds. So that was one of the key aspects. One of the other aspects is when you start looking at the technical aspects of producing and commercializing, there's still question marks on unit economics. So that leaves investors a bit, in the gray area sometimes. So you really need to build a really good product, in our case, and have a really good techno-economic analysis to be able to try and get these sort of investors over the line for long-term investment, because that's really what we need. And then the other aspect to what we're doing is that we need customers, and these customers are for a market that doesn't exist at the moment yet. So we really need to build the market, and we need to educate our customers so that there's a larger demand and a larger potential upside for our investors.
Sorry, yes.
Again, I'll say this again. FinTech was here 10 years ago. Township economics, particularly for Africa, did not make sense to a lot of investors 10 years ago. There was no financial inclusion. And what was the reason given? That, townships, they don't have the income, they don't, there were reasons given, but it was just that the vertical was at its early and in infancy stage. But innovations came, and the good thing about Africa, sometimes we do leapfrog technologies, and we've benefited certainly from that with our fintech, growth in fintech. But I think climate will get there. It's just, there's this idea that at the beginning, obviously, it's going to be expensive because there are infrastructural requirements to lay the land. But we were exactly here with fintech before, where it did not make sense to, financially include a lot of people. I'm also passionate about gender. It was the same thing. People just did not understand. And if you think about it historically, it's that the traditional VC model was not built, first of all, for Africa, for gender inclusion, for financial inclusion, for coastal communities,
for inclusion.
Yeah, for farming activities. But at some point, with the right policies, with the right collaboration, it will make sense and it will become cheaper. It's just we're at the beginning of the journey.
Got it. So it's early yet is the part of the answer, and I love that. I had a couple of follow-up questions for Pieter, just because you talked about the per unit economics. First, I haven't looked at this number. Do you have it in your head? Like, what's the global market for food? Do you know what that is? Because that's potentially your entire market. You know what I mean? If you look at it from that point, if you have any...
Yes, I don't, unfortunately.
Okay, somebody Google it, please. Do you have the number for the global market for food? Okay, you have a question. Okay, so we'll get to you in a second. Yeah. Then I would just go to my second question. Because, to your point, it is a nascent technology that you're working with, what is the affordability of the food that you produce? What is the cost for the end consumer?
Yes, so this is an iterative process. I'll give you an idea. We started cultivated meat essentially started as a global phenomenon in 2013 when a professor named Mark Post from the Netherlands unveiled a cultivated burger on national TV. That burger, one patty, cost $300,000 to make.
One expensive burger. Okay.
Exactly.
For now.
At current, there's about 150 to 200 companies playing within the cultivated meat space globally. Many of these companies have reached price parity already, which is an amazing feat. So part of the problem is exactly as mentioned before, we're quite capex intensive, and we're leveraging a lot of pharmaceutical technology to produce what we're doing. So there's a holistic approach needed where we actually need to look at the infrastructure and the operational aspects to reduce the cost for the unit economics, but we're getting there, and it's only been 10 years. So I'm foreseeing that within the next 10 years, there will be cultivated meat products on shelves, and they will be price parity with meat.
Thank you for that. So we get a sense from a $300,000 burger to a little bit more affordable now, hopefully. If we can get a mic to the gentleman back there who is raising his hand. Who has the mic? Oh, excellent.
My name is Andreas, and I think it's my role to name the elephant in the room because the title of the session is What on Earth Hit Climate Tech? And I have not heard you talking about it yet.
Andreas, I'm going to answer you. I made a bet that it's money that hit it.
No.
That's what I said.
No.
Please, I'm happy to be proven
no,
wrong.
It's a huge disruption, and I wish you guys would talk about it. I've been in this space for 20 plus years. I have to heavily oppose you that climate tech is a young sector or a young market. It's quite a mature market. It was just named different. It was green tech 10 years ago. You remember solar and Pego was a huge investment space. The reason I want to name the elephant is, have you guys heard of Cocoa Network? Have you heard what just happened 2 weeks ago? That Cocoa Network collapsed, one of the most prominent climate tech solutions, because its signature was not given to a carbon credit financing system, which was even, thank you very much, which was even backed by the World Bank, and only because one administrative point in the Kenyan government refused to give a signature, a whole company with $300 million of investment collapsed from one day to the other. I think that is what hit climate tech. What is hitting climate tech is that all of us who work in the climate tech space, we are so heavily reliant on subsidies. We are so heavily reliant on government support, which is so volatile and so insecure and unstable, that is the elephant that we have to address. Without stable regulation, without stable law, without jurisdiction, without reliability, also from the government side, it's going to be very, very difficult for this market to take off. And I wish you guys would talk about that a little bit more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Is there another? I see somebody else raising their hands. Okay. Well, so we'll address that. We have a question for the panel that is about whether they do feel supported by policy. And since you brought it up, we can jump to that. And I think Yasha, if you want to start that, because he's discussing something that is in your sector, it's carbon credits. So are we feeling supported by policy? What else do we want to see? And do we know anything about what happened to cocoa?
Yeah, I'll tell you right away that I'm not an expert in this field. So there's nothing I can say that would address it probably better than other panelists here. What I'll say in simple terms is that I believe that I, along with a lot of people in the room, are innovators. And as innovators, I think we frequently go first and then look for sensible policy to follow in order to regulate markets correctly, right? And so from point of view of where biodiversity is right now, it's much younger than the climate and carbon space. I think that we are starting to learn from it. And so I continue to be very positive about that, but let me pass it on to the rest of the panel.
And I also want to just one small point. Now, I hear you. I mean, I was an energy porter, so I hear you about climate tech. But when we talk about nascent sectors, we're talking about the specific subsectors that are represented here, that are not mobility, not energy, etc. But yes, Lucretia.
Yeah, and also it's when it becomes mainstream conversation versus when it's just there. I think Africa has always been dependent on agriculture, for example, but those people, the farmers, the majority of them were not included in the main ecosystem. So when we say it's new, that's what we mean, that for now it's more inclusive. So before, I grew up in Zimbabwe. There were very few commercial farmers during the time I was growing up. But for now, the people that are actively involved in that ecosystem, where we've got data points, are more, and it's much more inclusive. I guess that's what we are excited about. And as regards to cocoa, stuff will happen in any ecosystem. We can talk about fintech deals that went south in Africa all day. We can talk about e-commerce. It happens. But for me, I want to focus on what's working as well, not just to focus on the one thing that one policymaker, he cannot define. We can't allow one country, one policymaker to define where climate goes. We're also dealing with a very youthful population, right? And hopefully the under 25s will solve for some of the policy challenges that we have with our policymakers now, because they are a different generation with different value systems. And most of them, when I think about how my daughter knows how to sort waste. I didn't grow up sorting out waste. Waste management wasn't a thing. We didn't have blue, green, and red bins. That's what we mean when we say the ecosystem is still quite new. It's not that it wasn't always there, but it's much more mainstream now to think about decarbonization, to have schools talk about what's happening with climate change. That's what we mean.
Thank you. Luvo, did you want to add?
Yeah, no, just a quick one. I think for me, my response would be, it takes moments like these where we really enlighten the population around where we are in terms of development of climate tech. The understanding and the traction and the adoption of climate tech in our respective countries is different, right? Even though it's been there for years, but in terms of the adoption and application, it's different because there is involvement of SMEs and founders at grassroots level who are engaging with the government to influence policy. For example, in South Africa, the aquaculture and fisheries sector is one highly regulated industry in South Africa. And I think in Africa, to be quite frank, because for people to practice in that space, it's very difficult because of bottleneck policies. But it takes a beautiful while to transform those policies. What we had in the Presidential Commission in 2022, it took 3 years for them to understand the challenges of coastal communities on how it is important to adjust policies to allow these people to leverage on their livelihoods. But also in terms of development, uptake of technology in the space, it will take those engagements. But unfortunately, it's not something that happens overnight. It really takes years to make those adjustments and influence policy making, but it's on the ground, it's happening. And that's why we need this conversation to have to say, how do we influence policy and how do we uptake climate tech rapidly?
Thank you for that. I'm going to ball this over to Pieter really quickly. Just so you know, I looked up the massive food market in the world. So 9.5 trillion. I know we should not trust the first thing AI says, but it's an estimate, okay? So you have an upside to your market. But I also wanted to ask you to follow up on here. Do you have a policy ask? Do you feel supported? And if not, what kind of policies would support your sector?
So historically, I can only speak from a novel food perspective. We've been working with the regulatory bodies in South Africa. We've been very positive towards our new technology. There's not an existing framework in place, so we fall within multiple different frameworks at this point in time, but they've been very supportive. We're looking at expanding in the UK, and they've also been extremely supportive, and they've actually introduced a few different regulatory sandboxes, so to speak, for the technology to progress in the UK. So from both those perspectives, we feel like we've been supported quite well.
Excellent. Any other questions? And then thank you so much. I really appreciate that. That's exactly what I want. So please feel free to be disruptive and contradict me. I am not an expert. These are the experts. We'll go on. I'll ask a couple of more specific questions to some. So I'll turn now to Yasha. So you hinted at some of the problems in your sector in the terms that the people that own the land are not seeing a lot of money from this investment and this attempt to conserve. And I also know that there are issues around land rights, meaning in countries where there is you have difficulties enforcing land rights, people are getting moved off their lands. Talk a little bit about those difficulties, and once again, is there a solution of any kind?
I feel like that just follows the previous question about policy, right? Yeah, land rights are a really complicated issue, especially when we start talking about local and indigenous communities all over the world, here in Kenya, in Africa, Colombia, Indonesia, and on and on and on. We have been lucky enough to have an incredible team on our side. That has helped us break into understanding the challenges that are in the space that deal with land rights and what land right issues really come up, right? And we deal with issues like, let's say there's a person who is passed away. They've signed maybe a lease agreement with an ecotourism organization. They now have 8 grandchildren, maybe some piece of land been sold, and on and on. And so these type of issues that happen all over the world require technological solutions, right? They also require policy solutions. We have been working together with some fantastic legal counsel here in Kenya, part of our team. I want to shout out Liz Gitari, who's been part of a lot of land rights conversations. And we've been able to digitize her knowledge into our platform in order to give project developers access to that type of solution, right? These issues, as I said from the beginning, are not unique. They're not just here. They happen in the United States and so on, right? But Kenya, and predominantly the reason I'm in Kenya, has been a fantastic hotbed of prototyping, of innovating, of working together, collaborating to bring these solutions to the market. So I don't see why Kenya and Africa cannot lead this and show how these solutions work. And then obviously we are there. We've got interest coming out from other countries as well for that type of platform.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And then speaking of solutions, which was both policy-wise and technical solutions, you know, we've had panel discussions about AI and how it's infiltrated everything. Are we seeing more solutions in your sectors with AI? Feel free to.
Definitely. Definitely. I think this is a tech conference. I'm sure you guys walked around, you saw AI this, AI that, and that's fantastic, right? Running a tech company at this point, AI is table stakes, right? Whether you're using AI for HR, whether you're using AI for pushing code, prototyping, you know it probably better than I do, right? But a couple of things in AI that I'm really excited about, and I'm really excited that's entering this space. I was just at an agriculture panel a little bit earlier. Some of you caught it as well. One piece of tech that I'm super excited about is having AI now reach communities, reach individuals that did not grow up with tech training, that were not tech literal, and now with this incumbent AI solutions with LLM, et cetera, we're seeing that tech can start understanding us. We no longer have to just understand tech, no longer know how to speak tech. If any of you have ever taught a mother, a grandfather, a sibling, or how to use something when they don't, you know the pain. The other one that I want to shout out, and I've kind of talked about it a little bit, is specific to nature tech. Sorry about that. Yeah, specific to nature tech. In nature tech, the remote sensing instruments that are coming out and that you're able to use almost for free at this point are making our jobs of tracking nature outcomes and also traceably showing where each Kenyan shilling goes very simple. It creates traceability and trust in the system, right? With the models that we have built, we're able to track change down to individual blade of grass if we need to. So those are the two AI trends that I'm super stoked about.
Thank you. That's crazy. Do you know what he's talking about? I mean, basically satellite imaging technology that can analyze images and, just account for everything there, which is amazing. Yes.
AI and biotech and biosciences in general is completely changing the game as well. We're, particularly as Newform Foods, looking at different types of AI. One being Bayesian algorithms, which essentially are ways to optimize bioprocessing without using multiple different runs, so it reduces the cost and increases the efficiency of your optimization incredibly. So that's the one thing. And then even from a more smaller and minute perspective and more biological perspective, we're looking at metabolic models, which essentially gives you a stoichiometric idea of inputs and outputs for every single thing that you feed to a cell. So it makes our forecasting a lot easier, and it propels our research immensely, for sure.
I love that. There's a natural follow-up question here that's very specific to your industry. I don't know if anybody has thought about it, but what are you feeding these cells?
So we feed the cells cultivated media, so cell culture media, and basically what that is, or what it looks like, is like a pinkish fluid. It's only pink because it's got a pH indicator in it, and essentially what it is a range of amino acids, vitamins, fatty acids, carbon source, etc. Everything that you would feed, or what would be broken down from the food you eat, and be supplied by your blood to your cells, we feed the cells.
Interesting, which has an impact on the nutritional value of that food in the end.
Yes, and we've actually looked into that. There are ways that we can actually tailor the nutritional qualities of the meat that we produce using different feed.
Excellent. Any questions? Okay, I'm going to move the conversation back to finance a little bit. So I wanted to ask Lucretia to give us a granular example and explaining what blended finance is. As I said, you may all be experts, but if you're not, then I want you to understand what that means. Because when we talked ahead of this panel, you told me that blended finance is one of the keys to project finance for these types of sectors. So what is blended finance? What does that mean?
Okay. I think traditionally when we're thinking of funding, people would just go to equity, and then if it's asset-backed and if it's capex heavy, like you mentioned, that means a lot of the solutions, or if it's not scalable fast enough, that meant a lot of VCs couldn't underwrite most of the innovations that were coming up. What's changed and what's exciting about climate and where Africa is now, I can give an example of the Spiral transaction. The 100 million that came as blended finance. Now, what does that mean? It meant that it's a mixture of debt, equity, and maybe they were grant funded at the beginning of their journey of some sort. And that is important in that if you look at why the overall transaction would be attractive to all the different financiers, is that you've got vehicles and you've got batteries and you've got the swap infrastructure that's required for the innovation, and you also have revenues that are usage-driven. So recurring revenue is one aspect that makes a transaction exciting or scalable, also profitable in a real way. So, but it required a combination of funding instruments to bring it together. So it's not only about how much funding comes, it's fit for purpose funding that's also important and critical for climate.
Yeah, so what kind, a blend of philanthropic, a blend of grants, a blend of equity, all of the above.
And how the capital stacks are layered. I think you touched on something earlier where you said, most of the climate ventures sometimes they get access to limited grants, 50,000, for example, and they're supporting 300 farmers. But they will run out of runway if there's nothing else to catch them after they spend the grant. So the conversations, the collaborations that we're having in climate now is for funders to actually come together and say, let's make sure we're more intentional about how we are funding, even if it's grant funding. Who catches the grant-funded innovations post running out of that grant? And how do we make sure there's enough of a bridge to commercialize them so that we're just not wasting the limited capital that we have access to in Africa on the continent, just, spraying grants, but maybe make the innovations more intentional.
So you've heard that expression, spraying and pray. So we're not doing that anymore, apparently.
Not with grants.
Okay,
no.
cool. I have a wrap-up question and a lightning round. So just, I think you've talked a little bit about that, but given the geopolitical uncertainty and tighter economic financial conditions, what is the outlook? What is your sense, everyone here, not just Lucretia, what's your outlook for, funding in the future and for your sector? Pieter, real quick.
I think the climate issues we're facing and the food landscape that's growing, there's enough problems and the problems aren't getting better. So there's really going to be more of a policy drive to, hopefully, and that's what we're seeing, to actually make an impact. So hopefully that gets followed by investment, which we've seen is growing in the African space. So I see that in our food industry, there will be a lot of inroads being made in the next 5 to 10 years into novel foods being commercialized and actually generating a high amount of revenue within the space.
Just quickly, I think with climate and most founders in climate phases, there's a lot of education that still needs to go on because a lot of their innovations are not well understood. Part of the work that we did last year was to come up with a Blue Directory for Africa. I've got a few copies for those that are curious about what sort of solutions are being funded in blue economy. So a lot of them don't have a digital footprint. So if you're a founder in the audience, make sure that you become more visible so people understand what you're working on.
Excellent. Really quickly, Luvo and then Yasha. Okay, go. Yo, Yasha.
Okay. Great, fantastic. Very quickly then, I think the funding, and I really love your point about financing coming from different sources and not spraying it, is looking, for me, positive, right? I am an optimist, so maybe that's part of it. But what I would say is that we're starting to see with our platform and even outside of our offering in the sector, we're starting to see money flow down to individuals and we're starting to see the trust being built. Just a couple of months ago, we were able to disperse $300,000 from a large multinational company, Klarna, directly to landowners for their nature stewardship here. Right, so technically money went from Stockholm to Mara, to Olkinye, to Kitangela over here. So I'm very hopeful and I see the space growing.
Got it. Luvo, you have the last word.
Yeah, I think for me, in closing, I think a lot of it goes into how do we provide tailor-made capital for African SMMEs. And I'm saying that also reiterating on the need for a blended finance mechanism, which will allow startups to build up their solution. And then we can have VCs coming in, because what we've seen is a lot of mismatch between the VCs in the States and then the VC structure in Africa. So we need the VCs to come in, especially after the piloting phase, the philanthropy funding and accelerator programs, just to take the enterprise into the piloting and validation of the ideas. And then the VCs, when they come in later on, to fund the scaling and the growth of these SMMEs. But I think we've seen traction around the space. I mean, it is growing. We've seen SMMEs launching their enterprises. So the future is quite promising, especially that these systems are being put in place to make sure that SMMEs are able to reach their markets and then grow globally.
Thank you. A big round of applause to our wonderful panelists.